When growth stalls, most leaders reach for surface fixes like new campaigns, a sharper sales deck, even new hires. But the real issues are often deeper, such as misaligned systems, broken handoffs, or unreliable data. That's why we built the Growth Readiness Score. In just 5 minutes, you'll get a clear score across 4 critical areas of your revenue operations and see how you stack up against your peers with benchmark data. Tap the link in the show notes to get started. It's quick, insightful, and often reveals issues leaders don't expect.
I always talk about the key in finding solutions to anything is you got to have the right people having the right conversations at the right time. That ain't rocket science. But how often does that not happen? To me, it's mind-blowing, right? The right people having the right conversations at the right time. And if we do that, man, I think we can accomplish anything.
You're listening to RevOps Champions, a podcast created for B2B leaders to help you align your people, streamline your processes, trust your data, and leverage technology in order to grow your business. Hello and welcome back. Today I'm joined by Brian Schnell, partner and chair of the franchise practice at the law firm Faegre Drinker, and one of the most respected voices in franchising. For nearly 4 decades, Brian has advised franchisors ranging from emerging brands to some of the world's largest franchise systems, helping them navigate growth, governance, franchise relationships, compliance, and long-term brand sustainability. What sets Brian apart is that he's not only a leading franchise attorney, he has also served as both a COO and a chief legal officer for a major healthcare franchisor, giving him first-hand experience operating and scaling franchise systems. Brian is widely recognized for championing responsible franchising, a philosophy centered on sustainable growth, strong franchisee economics, mutual value creation, and long-term franchisor-franchisee partnerships built on trust and collaboration. And that is a philosophy that we very much share here at Dennewill. Brian, welcome to the RevOps Champions podcast.
Thanks, Brendon. I look forward to our conversation.
Yes, I know you and I could, we could do this probably every week and we'd never run out of things to talk about, but I'm happy to have you on the show. Brian, you spent nearly 4 decades in franchising. What separates the franchise systems or brands and networks that thrive over the long term from those that struggle to sustain growth?
Yeah, Brendon, there are a number of attributes that I think separate what I refer to as highly successful franchise systems. And a system includes the franchisor and the franchisee, right? You have to have both being successful in order to have a successful and sustainable brand. And so it's a couple of areas, and a lot of other franchise voices or leaders talk about this. So this isn't groundbreaking, but it really is franchisee unit level profitability. It is, I believe, having the franchisor who views its franchisees as key stakeholders in the brand. And that's something more than just a party to a contract or a party to a relationship. So it really is how a franchisor designs and implements its franchise relationship with its franchisees. And so that, I believe, Brendon, is a feature that holds a lot of brands back, especially emerging franchisors. Because when you're an emerging franchisor, you haven't lived through all the different issues that come up in a franchise system and with franchisees. And so it is easier to grow a system, and it's a lot more difficult to sustain and get that system to the next level. And that really talks about, I believe, the nuances, the nitty-gritty of franchising and a franchise relationship. And it is unlike, in my view, any other commercial relationship that's out there. Because we were just talking about this. It isn't just the X's and O's. It's the trust. It's the culture. And if you don't have that within all the different layers of a franchise system, you're not going to have that kind of success and sustainability. Let me give you one example. We talk about Bill Killian, who's now retired. He and I developed a presentation years ago called The 5 Habits of the Highly Successful Franchise System. And those habits, Brendon, we talk about every single day. But one of them is, and it's the very first one, The first habit is all stakeholders have an undying devotion to the brand and the brand promise. So think about that in a franchise context. And we know this in our
Uh-huh.
everyday lives. The people that impact the brand for consumers often is the franchisee's employees, right? It's that at the unit level interaction.
Uh-huh.
So do they even know what the brand stands for? It is easy for the CEO and leadership team to say, here's our brand promise. But if
Mhm.
you don't have that from the franchisor executive team and their support team to the franchisees and the franchisees to their employees, that makes it that much more challenging to have that devotion, that passion to the brand. And again, we know that as customers, we value that kind of customer service
Uh-huh.
in any interaction that we have, whether it's eating, hotel, service with our pets, anything. It's a
Uh-huh.
difference maker. So, how you instill that in your franchise system, that's more than just a product or a service. And so, that's just one example of what you can tell,
Mhm.
passionately believe is a difference maker in franchising. And those systems, organizations, networks that get that, they're successful and sustainable. Those that struggle with that, they get bogged down. And then they get bogged down in other things that result more in confrontation rather than collaboration. Again, yeah, that's probably 5 minutes of one example of what I believe, though. This is after close to 40 years of working with a lot of different brands. What separates the question you asked, what
Mhm.
separates those franchisors that are, my words, highly successful and sustainable than
Mhm.
otherwise?
Right. Yeah. So I guess so in summary, it's really that symbiotic relationship without which a franchise brand just won't be successful, right? So that symbiotic relationship between the franchisor and the franchisees, which includes at the franchisee level, it includes their teams because it
Yep.
ultimately serves the customer.
Right? If a franchisee, and I get where it might be a single franchisee, right? But if you have a system and you have a fair number of franchisees that are frustrated, that are disgruntled, that are unhappy, that
Uh-huh.
feel like they've been oversold and underdelivered, right?
Uh-huh.
If you have franchisees that are in that with that mindset, do you
Uh-huh.
think that they're going to impact their employees? Their employees are going to see some of that, right?
Uh-huh.
Rather than have franchisees all in. And if you have franchisees that are all in and believe in the brand and believe in the mission and see a path forward to making money and achieving their goals and objectives, that impacts employees positively. If it's the alternative, right, that makes it that much more challenging at the level of the guest customer interaction. The
Yeah.
way I describe that, Brendan, is Ron Gardner, a leading franchisee lawyer, he and I do a lot of presentations and we talk a lot and we see things a little bit differently in a lot of areas, but we also though believe in the power of collaboration. And so
Uh-huh.
franchisors that have this culture of collaboration, this collaborative leadership style,
Uh-huh.
he and I and a lot of others view that as much more successful formula than what I call command and control. And command and control is I'm the franchisor, you're the franchisee. I'm going to tell you what to do, how to do it, when to do it, and what happens if you don't do it, and how much
Uh-huh.
you're going to pay for doing it. And if you don't do it, here's what's going to happen to you. And when
Uh-huh.
the franchisee says why, the franchisor says, because section 6.A of the franchise agreement, right, permits me to do that. That's command and control. I get where in some instances, a franchisor needs to make a command and control decision on a various promotion, on a various crisis situation. So I'm not saying everything is one way,
Uh-huh.
but what I am saying is if your franchisees don't feel like they have a voice, right? I often talk about they don't want to vote, right? They know it's not a democracy, they want a voice. So if
Uh-huh.
your franchisees don't have a voice and you don't listen to that voice, then you have to get it right every single time, right?
Uh-huh.
If
Uh-huh.
you haven't included them and listened to them, you got to get it right every single time. Isn't going to happen. But if you
Uh-huh.
include them actively, doesn't mean that right? It's a vote. Doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to agree, but you're going to say to them, I'm going to listen. I'm going to take into account everything that all our stakeholders are sharing. And then I'm going to make the decision and I'm going to explain it to you. And you know what? If we don't get that one right, they say, yeah, we were in on that though. Let's move on. Let's
Mm-hmm.
focus on the next thing.
Mm.
So that's where too often conflict can slow down, disrupt, stagnate everything. And so,
Mhm.
how do we get, and again, I always say conflict's not necessarily bad, but how do we move from people having differing views to get moving forward and collaborating on the solution rather
Mhm.
than proving we're right and you're wrong?
Yeah. Which, of course, to your point, is the difference between having a voice versus a vote, right?
That's right.
So, Brian, is there anything else there? So, you talk about how too many franchisors still approach system changes with that sort of command and control mindset. What other distinction can you make between franchisees who want a voice versus a vote?
Well, I think it is how we as franchisors design. Franchisors are really, really good at designing how to offer products to customers, the operations part of it. They're good at designing marketing. They're good at designing technology. They're good at that. Some
Mhm.
franchisees may question on the technology front, given how technology is always evolving. We can talk more about that later. But
Mhm.
we have systems in place. We don't necessarily have systems in place on how to communicate, right? On
Mhm.
how to establish a franchise relationship, on how to be clear on the roles and responsibilities of the franchisor and the franchisee.
Mhm.
We should have a section of the operations manual that talks about that, the relationship,
Mhm.
system change, how we're going to go about getting input from franchise owners and other stakeholders. And like anything else, we may change that. The operations manual is a living, breathing document. So
Mhm.
that can evolve over time. But if we don't give any real thought and intention to it, then it happens haphazardly. And
Right.
when things happen haphazardly, we don't get the outcome that we want. It's
Right.
not scalable.
Mhm.
It's not scalable. And so, and again, that doesn't mean we have to agree on everything. Organizations that are successful get input from people that have different perspectives. That's
Mhm.
part of leadership, is
Mhm.
being able to distill all of that.
Mhm.
And we talk a lot about franchise leadership. We talk about that at our franchise summit every year.
Mhm.
Franchise leadership is another difference maker because,
Mhm.
again, it isn't command and control. You have to have your franchisees. And then think about this in what you and I do as vendors and suppliers, right? If we have input
Mhm.
into that, that's good too. So, who are all the key stakeholders? And the
Mhm.
really, really good leaders are better at that and master that. And that isn't just something that happens without a lot of experience. The good leaders will have mentors, will have coaches, will have people that are helping them
Mhm.
become better at that because it ain't easy.
Mhm.
And when the tough stuff happens, if we try to retreat and prove we're right and you're wrong, or we
Mhm.
double down on our way because we're the franchisor, that just creates more roadblocks. Oftentimes, Brandon, disputes, and you can talk to litigators or non litigators, but
Mhm.
franchise disputes typically arise because of a breakdown in communication.
Mhm.
It isn't because there's some massive fraud. It is just a breakdown in communication. And that goes back to the roles of the franchisor, the franchisee, and how we're going to design and implement this relationship. There's some ups and downs, but the less time you can spend on something that's creating friction and get through that and up, man,
Mhm.
that's when you start having more trust, right? It's easy to trust when nothing goes wrong. Can you maintain the trust when things get hard? And
Yeah,
they will get
yes.
hard, right?
Yeah,
They will.
well, like we talk about a lot on this show is that they might not get as hard if you're not growing, but if the goal is to grow, I mean, growth requires change, and your processes are changing, your people are changing. You're not necessarily changing people like specific people, but as system grows, you're typically adding people to support more and more franchisees. You cannot support the a franchise brand with 30 units will need more people to support 100 units or 300 units. That's just logic, right? And we, of course, see that all the time because in order for us to build the technology system for a franchise brand, again, we see these sort of the people challenges, which more specifically to your point, it's the leadership piece. When they start having leadership related challenges, they often think that the technology that we're going to be building for them to replace whatever CRM system they're using or whatever is going to fix their leadership issues. And of course, that's not going to happen, you know.
Yep. Yep. Well, and again, I think AI is a big topic in franchising,
Mhm.
right? Today in any business,
Oh,
right?
actually, well, yeah, let's go there because you mentioned the franchise summit that you essentially host and is
Yep.
coming up again in August, which I'm very excited about to be their sponsor. Tell us what you've been doing this for a while, and I love your model and how you create the content for those couple of days at the franchise summit. What are currently the biggest challenges in the franchise space, and what are currently
Yep.
the biggest opportunities? So tell us what's on the docket, what's on the agenda for this year's franchise
Yeah.
summit.
Yeah. So our summit this year is August 18th and 19th here in Minneapolis. Best time of year to be in Minneapolis, not January or February.
Correct.
But what we try to do, Brendan, is we bring, and last year I think we had folks from 26 states and Canada, right? So it
Mhm,
really is a conference where we try to bring in from a national audience, franchisors and franchisees and suppliers that are, in my view, the best of the best, right?
mhm,
And we want to have conversations about what's keeping franchisors and franchisees up at night. Now, I've
mhm,
always been proud of every single panel we have a multi-unit franchisee on that panel
mhm,
because we just talked about the importance of their voice. And so
mhm,
we have a number of panels focused on what's keeping people up at night. I'm excited about our keynote speaker, Brendan, this year. It's Ricky Kellman.
mm,
And I work with Katrina Mitchell and franchise speakers every year to find somebody who's going to make a difference. And I won't do this justice, but Ricky's main theme and what he's going to spend a lot of time on is mindset, right? And we just talked about that. You
uh-huh,
have to have the right mindset to accomplish what you really want to accomplish and what's possible.
yep,
And system change is a good example. A lot of human beings, we don't like change, right?
mhm,
We want to keep doing things in our lives, personal, right? Not everybody, but we kind of like, right, doing things the way we've done it.
mhm.
But man, you can't do that in today's world. And
If you
so
if you wanna grow.
that's
Yeah,
right, if you
yeah,
want to grow. And so Ricky's going to talk about the mindset, not only the mindset of organizations, but the
mhm,
mindset of each of us, right?
absolutely.
As we are the organization, right? So I'm
Mhm,
excited about that. And we're going to talk about AI. And so the other thing that I think is really cool from what we try to do at our summit is it's this unique, it is not a legal conference, right? But our Faegre lawyers are very, very commercial. We get it, right?
mhm,
We get franchising and we have subject matter experts that are working on AI related issues, solutions for not just our franchisor clients, but other clients. And so
mhm,
we're going to talk about, right, the challenges that AI presents and
mhm,
how we solve for those in a meaningful way. Again, given today's environment, AI tools and technology can help us in so many different ways, and they can replace some of what we do. It
mhm,
can't replace the relationship,
absolutely.
right? It
Mhm,
can't replace the relationship. That's personal. And who knows if that's going to change 20 years from now? I'm just talking about right now.
mhm,
And so we're going to talk about that, right? How do
that's
you
awesome.
find solutions with all those nuances from an AI front? And then it builds out to we're going to have leaders, national leaders talking about what they're doing from a brand marketing presence. So to your point,
Mhm,
as we grow, how do we continue to develop our brand? Customer marketing, friend dev marketing, just brand presence in
mhm,
today's world with all of the technology that's available. And so here's the challenge with that. Franchisees, again, this is consistent with what we were just talking about.
mhm,
Franchisees want us and need us to do that as a franchisor because they're too busy just working day in and day out in their business. So
mhm,
they want and need us. but
Right.
we got to design a way to have, I always talk about the key in finding solutions to anything is you got to have the right people having the right conversations at the right time. That ain't rocket science. But how often does that not happen? To me, it's mind blowing, right? The right people having the right conversations at the right time. And if we do that, man, I think we can accomplish anything. When we don't do that, we make it infinitely more difficult for us to get through to the next level again as we continue to grow, as you aptly stated.
Right, right. Yeah, and this is the model that we use. So the revenue operations model that we use when we're building an integrated revenue engine for a franchise or any other business for that matter that we've worked with in the past. It's a four-pillar model which starts with people. So it's people, process, data, and technology. And it's deliberate and it's in that order because when a franchise brand speaks to us because they've outgrown their technology, or at this point, everything that we're doing is now also the AI conversation is part of it. So where do we add AI as part of that? And HubSpot is the CRM that we implement, but then
Yep.
we integrate other systems they're using. And each of those systems already have AI built into them. But then if there's other AI that we need to add, then we'll do that. But the interesting part, coming back to what you were saying around the people having the right conversations at the right time. Again, if you want to scale, you need the systems and the tools to help you so that
Yes.
if you're in Fran Dev or if you're a multi-unit franchisee and with a team of people that is managing other people, they need to know and they need to be more efficient every morning at whenever they start their day. The more efficient you can make their calendar for that day, the more efficient and more profitable everybody's going to be.
Absolutely agree. Right. When we're having conversations, it isn't necessarily we're going to, fly in and meet with every owner face to face. Franchisors should still do that, but that's not what we're talking about. How do we design those conversations in an effective and efficient manner? Well
Right.
said.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
and technology is a huge part of that. A
Yeah.
huge part.
Right. Well, but again, it always starts though with leadership, right? And I think
Yes.
I want to come back to what you were saying, and I'm really looking forward to Ricky's keynote. The way we see it is they know that if they're growing, things are going to break, and that is 50% of the battle won right there. Because if they don't have that mindset, getting the other half of the battle is never going to happen because they're going to be stuck trying to do everything themselves. So, I mean, obvious examples are a founder franchise brand, depending on their unique gifts, they could get to 100 units, but that doesn't happen very often. They typically stall at 30 units, and then unless they start bringing in other people to help them scale, they're not going to get to 100 units, and they're going to have to do the same thing once they get to 100 units. If they want to get to 300, they're going to need to change their leadership, their processes, and their systems.
I've heard a lot of franchise leaders who I value highly talk about it in this context, Brennan. They will say that our leadership team that got us from point A to point B were phenomenal, right? And I value them and love them. But that's not necessarily the same team that's going to get us from point B to point C, right?
Right.
And so effective leaders understand that and do it with heart and grace, right?
Mhm.
Rather than just we're firing everybody,
Sure.
right? We got to change out the leadership team, right? Again, that being a franchise leader is challenging and difficult. And if you try to do it on your own, right, man, that's hard. So, how do you find a way to help you with the right folks be that kind of leader in a system? Because
Mhm.
that's what it takes. And then and the good ones might even say, hey, right, I'm done. I've done because I find it hard for somebody to consistently do that
Mhm.
for 10 or more years, right? And so that's why there's often change because people say it's time for somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you hear Tom Curtis from Burger King, who was a person that came in and talked to us at the IFA summer board meeting, and his message, right? And he's a former Domino's guy. So
Mm.
right, we're all familiar with Domino's and Patrick
Yep.
Doyle and how he turned Domino's around. And so sometimes you need the change at the CEO level too to
Mhm.
get that moving in a different direction. So it's fluid, it's nuanced, there's no one way of doing any of this. It's
Yep.
just, again, understanding it is the first step. to
Yeah.
understand it. Seek to
Right.
understand, seek to clarify, seek to make that kind of difference.
Yes. And one of the best things, I know you experience this at every franchise event that you go to or the one that you host yourself, but it was so apparent again at IFA in February. You're talking about there are so many good people in the franchise space who are really good at getting brands from, let's say, 30 to 100 units or whatever that their sort of area
Yep.
expertise is. And in many cases, the best thing you can do for them is once they start outgrowing their abilities is say, okay, guys, we need a new team. Every year there are hundreds of new emerging franchise brands that they can go back and help get from 30 to 100 units again, right? And you've seen this over your 4 decades in the industry, how people move from one franchise brand to the next. And in many cases, it's probably for that reason. It's like they've added the value at the brand for as long as they could, but now they want to
Yep.
do that same thing at a different brand, which is, again, a reminder for any sort of emerging franchise brands listening. It's not the end of the world if someone has to go and find a place to do what they do really well, find somewhere else to do that.
Yes. Agreed.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, Brian, having served as both a franchise executive and a legal advisor, how has that operational experience changed the way you advise clients today?
Yeah, I think, well, I realized I was a better lawyer than a COO. So that was one lesson learned.
Well, that's a perfect segue from what we were just talking about. You know, we
Yes.
we all have our unique abilities. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. And I have always said, right, that operations and in particular franchise consultants, business consultants, those people that are in the field, hardest job in franchising because they're working directly with owners. And again, owners are not one shape and size. They all have different needs. And
Yeah.
so a franchise consultant has to have a skill set, right, that is varied and unique. But it even goes back before. So what has shaped me and my view on franchising and how, I view my experience and expertise beyond legal
Hmm.
goes back to Brendon. The first opportunity I got in franchising was at a law firm, and my first client that I did substantive work for was Dairy Queen,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
And so I had the good fortune, and I was a first and second year lawyer, so I was just observing, listening. I had an office out at Dairy Queen. The general counsel, Bill Zucco, a great mentor of mine, he included me in meetings with Fran Dev, with marketing, operations. And I'd sit and listen, even if there was a meeting with the CEO, right? Sit and listen and
Hmm.
observe and seek to understand. And the biggest takeaway from me was this franchising relationship. And what's the objective of the franchisor, the perspective, right? What's the best desired outcome with that, whatever it is. And so to understand that commercial relationship of franchising
Mm.
and what it is and what it isn't served me so that then we were able to take that. And so then, having a more operations role, just continue to support that. And so I think that's what has enabled me and our practice to kind of do what we do and do it well.
Mm, mm. That's, yeah. I mean, again, it's not hard to see why you were seen as a very different type of advisor to many others that you might be compared to just because of that experience and seeing how brands actually operate cross functionally has to be incredibly valuable both to you and of course to your clients.
And the earlier that we can, right? So I always say this, Brendan, because there's going to be conflict, right? There's going to be a question, there's going to be an issue, there might be a dispute, right? But I
Hmm.
always describe it this way: disputes don't start here, disputes start here. And it's often because of a breakdown in communication. So
Hmm.
if we are wired, and again, if there are stakeholders, and maybe one of those stakeholders is me helping, right? We will find a solution to this breakdown probably every single time. But if it's avoided, right, and it happens too frequently, the breakdown is not dealt with because as long as they continue to pay their royalties, and now more franchisees are maybe ticked off,
Hmm.
and then lawyers get involved, right? And then we go now. It's about winning, and I'm overstating it a bit,
Sure.
but if you're in litigation, right,
Mm.
then we're doing the litigation thing. Let's deal with it right now and figure it out. So it's that kind of, again, what's our desired outcome? And are we having the right people having the right conversations at the right time? I always ask our clients, what's our desired outcome? And they may say, we're not sure yet. Okay. All right. So that's okay. I just had a conversation yesterday with a client, two different client representatives. They had two different, what they thought would be the desired outcome. That's okay, right? But let's just be mindful of that and see
Mhm.
where there's some commonality. So, how we do things in franchising and who we do it with is as important as anything else. Goes back to that relationship
Yeah.
commonality.
Yeah, that's it's really interesting that you say that because we talk about this a lot, and we're actually currently working on a franchise decision matrix because what we keep seeing and hearing about is that sort of the example we use is like there were some franchisees were waving a red flag 6 weeks ago, but the franchisor only found out about it today. How does that happen? The way we explain it is, well, there's a breakdown in process, so which often then means that might be an issue with how the team is how the team, the people are structured. And if the people are all in good shape, then maybe it's time to change the process. But then where we come in is what we're realizing is where that's happening. These brands are working with old systems that are not integrated, and they're having Susie having to pull reports, and which they get 2 weeks later because they've got to pull it from multiple different systems. And by the time the decision maker at the corporate level gets the information that they need, even if they have all the right cultural attributes within that brand, it's too late because the franchisees are already not very happy. And that just seems
Yep.
unnecessary in a day and age when you can have the technology and communication systems where that data should be available in real time, where
Yes.
someone at the corporate should, at 8 a.m. the next morning at the latest, they should say, there are 3 units in this particular region that are complaining about X, Y, and Z, and there's 7 units in another one. We're starting to see a trend. What are we going to do about it?
Yep. No, I love that, Brandon. And so this is my 2 cents because you need the data, right? Decisions need to be data driven, but not data driven, period. It's
Correct.
you need to have the data and then you need the emotion, you need the human touch.
The
But
leadership,
you don't have the data and
yeah,
you're just dealing, that likely is going to result in bad decisions, right?
right,
It's
yeah,
that combination of both. The other thing is, oftentimes in franchising, we don't need the full decision immediately. There
mhm,
might be a series of conversations or a series of stages,
mhm,
right? So if we try to solve the big thing right away, that's hard. That's
mhm.
hard. So can we break it down into smaller things? Let's get some momentum. Let's get some, okay, now we're agreeing on a smaller issue to build on, to build on, to build on. And oftentimes leaders want to, we just got to solve it all right away. Man, that makes it hard.
Right. I think one of the consistent themes that you've been talking about, you believe that the relationship is so important, which of course also then comes back to the leadership piece. This problem that we're talking about that, unfortunately happens way too often, it can be resolved by good leadership, but the inefficiency and the time that it takes to reactively solve these types of issues when they could actually be resolved proactively, part of what we're currently doing, it's called cost of inaction. In other words, if the cost of not having the systems in place to nip those things in the bud when they happened 6 weeks ago instead of today, 6 weeks later, when everything has festered and become
Yep.
a bigger issue. When you take that across a 250, 300, 500 unit brand, I mean, that's a very painful and an extremely costly thing. So even though the good leaders will ultimately figure it out, what is it costing them
Yes.
and the growth of the brand? Yeah.
Well said.
Unfortunately, Brian, we're going to have to wrap it up here because I know I have another 13 questions, but we'll have to leave those for another day. But I'm going to end with one question here, which is sort of just looking forward a little bit. And I know, and I'm really looking forward to the franchise summit in August because this is, I think, a lot of what we're going to be talking about there and learning about there, but which is the trends. What do you believe will most significantly shape the future of franchising over the next couple of years?
Well, certainly AI and technology will, as we discussed. But I would just emphasize that doesn't mean that the human element of this is less important. They're both vitally important, and the brands that figure out how to find that balance will be successful and sustainable. But I think it is this because customer and consumer demands are going to continue to be front and center, right? And those brands that can make that connection in a meaningful way so that customers are more so, and again, you know this better than I, it's about attracting new customers and keeping existing customers. And how we do that in a way that will continue to focus on franchisee unit level profitability, right? That's the magic. That's going to be the challenge. How do we capture the guest customer experience in a meaningful way, knowing that that's evolving and yet not at the expense of unit level profitability? And one other thing we haven't talked about, and I believe it can be a positive impact and influence, and it's only going to continue to grow. And we're going to talk about it at the summit is private equity. It's private equity. And
Yeah.
so how that is channeled and utilized in a way that achieves what we talked about, and I believe it can, versus the alternatives of all they care about is their profitability. I think that's another dynamic that is going to continue to grow and evolve. And we're going to talk about that at the summit. We're going to have, Matt Holler and Sam Ballas, the IFA leaders. I'm going to have a fireside chat with them. So we got a lot that we're going to explore in a way that, as I always talk about, this is about giving our audience the ability to take home best practices, opportunities that'll make a difference. And not everything will fit, but there'll be something for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm so looking forward to that. And I like the way, and I totally agree with what you're saying and how this comes together. So I'm not sure if you know who Jeff Woods is. He wrote the book, The AI Driven Leader. I had him on the show last year. He's, I would say is one of the thought leaders in this space. And
Yep.
his book, which is called The AI Driven Leader, he says it's not about technology, it's about strategic leadership.
Yeah.
Right. And the next thing, just commenting on the PE point, is I think one of the reasons that you are seeing this continuous growth of PE in franchising is because good PE companies understand the combination of leadership and systems, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
they know when to invest in the technology that'll help those systems scale without the least amount of friction. And I think that's the reason that private equity is growing so much. Thank you so much for sort of bringing that all together, which is it's leadership, systems, and of course, those systems today include AI.
Absolutely.
Brian, thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you in August at the Franchise Summit.
Brendon, thanks for having me, and I enjoyed it.
Thank you, Brian.
Take care.